Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into the Louisiana sugar parishes, where the air hangs heavy with river mist and cane smoke, and where one of the richest landscapes in America hides one of its cruelest human truths. You might picture green fields, broad verandas, polished silver, and slow boats drifting along the Mississippi. And yes, all of that is here. But so is the sound of chains at dawn, the ache of bent backs in wet soil, and a silence that settles over people who know the day ahead will ask for nearly everything they have. This is the polished world of sugar, and it runs on terror. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself drift into a place where the river moves lazily. The cane leaves whisper softly, and human suffering is folded into the landscape so completely that the grand houses almost seem built from it. You arrive in southern Louisiana in the 1850s, where the land lies low and damp and the Mississippi River bends like a giant brown ribbon through the country. The mornings begin with a wet chill that clings to your skin. Fog hovers over the water, and the earth smells rich, muddy, and faintly rotten, as though everything is always half growing and half decaying at once. The parishes stretch along the river roads, lined with plantations that seem orderly from a distance. White columns, live oaks, long avenues on neat rows of cane. It can almost look peaceful. That is the trick. Sugar country has a polished face, but beneath it lives one of the harshest labor systems in the United States. Cotton plantations are brutal enough, and rice fields bring their own deadly punishments. But sugar has a particularly grim reputation. Even in its own time, enslavers and visitors often admitted that sugar demanded more strength, more hours, more bodies, more loss. The crop is profitable, which is another way of saying someone is getting rich from another person's pain. You walk the river road and feel the ground give slightly under your shoes. The air grows warmer as the sun rises. Insects begin their constant humming. Somewhere in the trees a bird calls once, then stops, as if it has reconsidered. You pass a plantation house standing high and proud, painted to suggest refinement and order. Nearby are slave cabins, smaller and rougher, built with practical indifference. The contrast is almost absurd. One house announces comfort, the other barely promises shelter, and yet both belong to the same system. The sugar parishes became wealthy because the climate and soil of southern Louisiana could support cane on a large scale, though not without difficulty. Sugar cane is fussy, demanding, and easily damaged by cold. It requires careful timing, heavy labor, and expensive machinery. That meant the men who dominated the industry often saw themselves as a special class of planters, grander and more sophisticated than ordinary farmers. They liked to imagine themselves as bold agricultural entrepreneurs, masters of science and discipline, gentlemen naturally, men of cultivation, men who probably never noticed the joke. Because the true cultivation here is human suffering. You notice it first in the rhythm of the place. Nothing feels loose or casual. There is a tense, regulated beat to the plantation, as if every movement has been measured against profit. Wagons creak, hooves stamp. An overseer's voice cuts across the yard. The cane itself rises tall and sharp-edged, rustling in long, dry whispers when the wind moves through it. Touch a leaf carelessly and it can slice your skin. Even the crop seems unfriendly. Enslaved black Americans in these parishes live inside this hard rhythm from the moment the day begins. Before sunrise, cabins stir. People rise from rough bedding after too little sleep. The floor may feel cold beneath bare feet. Clothing is coarse and often damp from the climate. Smoke from cooking fires mixes with the smell of earth, sweat, stale fabric, and nearby animals. Children cry softly. Someone coughs. A pot rattles. Outside, darkness thins into grey. Then work calls. In the sugar parishes, labour is not merely long, it is relentless, and it changes with the season. Much of the year means clearing, planting, ditching, weeding, hoeing, and repairing. The land must be drained and managed carefully, Because Louisiana water is both friend and enemy. Too little moisture ruins the crop. Too much turns fields into a swampy trap. Enslaved workers dig ditches, build embankments, haul tools, and move through mud that sucks at their legs. Mosquitoes whine around their faces, sun presses down, clothes stick to the body, hands blister, toughen, split, and heal badly. But even outside harvest season, there is no gentle period. The reputation of Louisiana sugar is built especially on what happens when grinding begins. Once the cane is ripe, it must be cut and processed quickly before it spoils. That urgency turns the plantation into something close to an industrial prison. Mills run, boilers roar, fires burn day and night. Workers are driven in shifts, often with very little rest. Planters know the clock is their master too, but they can hand that pressure downward. Pressure has a direction in this world. It always travels toward the people with the least power. Some historians argue that sugar plantations in Louisiana were among the deadliest labour regimes in the antebellum South, because the work combined field labour, factory-like processing, dangerous machinery, and intense seasonal deadlines. Others emphasise that mortality varied from plantation to plantation, depending on management, disease, and local conditions. But nobody serious mistakes the system for anything mild. The debate is about degrees of horror, which is not exactly comforting. You move closer to the quarters and imagine the people who lived there in the 1850s. Some were born in Louisiana. Some were brought from older slave states through the domestic slave trade, sold south and west as the Cotton Kingdom expanded and as sugar profits lured buyers with money. Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, the Carolinas. Lives were uprooted and redirected into cane country. Families were broken by sale. Mothers lost children. Husbands lost wives. Siblings vanished into markets and account books. The journey south could feel like being sent into a rumour made real, a place people whispered about with dread. Sugar country had that reputation. It was known as a hard place. You can understand why almost immediately. The plantation landscape is beautiful in the way storms can be beautiful, or deep water, or a polished blade. The river glitters in afternoon light. Spanish moss sways lazily from branches. White egrets rise from the wetlands like drifting scraps of cloth. At sunset the sky glows pink and copper, and the cane fields catch the light in soft bands. But beauty here never offers safety. It only sharpens the contrast. Inside the labour force, people are sorted and measured according to the needs of production. Strong field hands are prized. Skilled sugar boilers may hold a dangerous kind of importance because the refining process requires judgment and experience. Drivers, artisans, domestics, nurses, and children each occupy different positions within plantation life. Yet none escape the fundamental fact of enslavement. Every role is controlled. Every person is owned. Every hour can be taken. A strange little detail survives from plantation records and travellers' accounts. Some planters took immense pride in their sugar machinery, discussing rollers, kettles, and steam power with almost affectionate excitement, while barely granting full humanity to the workers who kept those machines alive. They could describe a new vacuum pan with more warmth than they described a woman in the fields. It is one of those quirks of history that would be darkly funny if it were not built on such misery. The machinery gets admiration. The people get quotas. Religion also hangs over this world. Church bells may ring on Sundays. Planters speak confidently about duty, order, and Christian care. Some insist they are paternal guardians of an inferior race, a claim so self-serving that it almost makes you admire its audacity. Almost. The language of kindness is used to mask coercion. The language of family is used by men who buy and sell actual families. Respectability in the sugar parishes is often just cruelty with polished shoes. The enslaved, meanwhile, create inner worlds that the plantation cannot fully own. In cabins, by firesides, in whispered conversations at night, people exchange news, memory, warning, comfort, and prayer. Songs move softly through darkness. A hand rests on a child's shoulder. Someone braids hair by dim light. Someone tells a story from memory. Perhaps from Africa through generations, perhaps from another state left behind. perhaps from yesterday's field transformed into something bearable through speech. These are not free spaces. They are fragile ones. But fragile is not the same as empty. You feel the evenings settle over the plantation. Humidity thickens again. Frogs begin calling from the ditches. Smoke from kitchens and furnaces lingers low in the air, sweet and bitter together. It carries the scent of molasses, ash, wet wood, sweat, and iron. The smell is unforgettable. Sugar in its raw state is not the clean white thing that reaches northern tables. Here it is brown, sticky, smoky, and hot, more like an atmosphere than a product. It clings to barrels, tools, floors, and skin. That sweetness has a cost. By the 1850s, the United States is already a nation arguing bitterly over slavery's future. But in the sugar parishes, slavery is not some abstract political issue debated in distant halls. It is the structure of every day. It decides where you sleep, how you move, what you eat, whether your child stays beside you, whether your body is whipped, whether your labour stops at sundown, whether your name is spoken kindly or barked like an order. In places like these, national debates about liberty must have sounded almost surreal. Liberty, a lovely word, not one that walks easily here. The white planter class measures success in acreage, yield, and market prices. Newspapers discuss improvements in cultivation. Merchants extend credit. Factors handle shipments. Banks support expansion. Steamboats carry cargo downriver. The whole economy interlocks around sugar's promise of profit. Yet none of this elegance removes the brute fact that the industry depends on forced labour maintained by violence. Behind every polished ledger stands a field. Behind every field stands a gang of workers. Behind every gang stands threat. And the threat is understood. It does not always need to shout. You learn quickly that the atmosphere of fear is part of the design. Overseers supervise the pace of work. Punishment waits in the background, sometimes spoken, sometimes merely implied. Surveillance shapes posture, voice, and timing. A person learns when to lower the eyes, how to hide exhaustion, how to carry pain without advertising it, how to speak carefully in the earshot of power. Even stillness can be political here, even tone. Even the time it takes to lift a basket or straighten your back. Historians still dispute how far planters truly understood the psychological damage they inflicted, or whether profit blinded them so thoroughly that they reduced suffering to numbers. But the testimonies left by formerly enslaved people, along with plantation rules and records, make one thing plain: the system knew enough. It knew what hunger could do. It knew what separation could do. It knew what threats could do. It knew exactly how fear travelled through a community. As night deepens, the plantation grows quieter on the surface. The grand house glows with lamplight. Somewhere inside, glass clinks softly, fabric rustles, and a piano may offer a few drifting notes. In the quarters, the sounds are lower and more intimate. Murmured voices, a baby shifting in sleep, the scratch of straw, the far-off creak of a wheel not yet still. Over everything lies the soft hiss of cane leaves in the dark, moving in the breeze like 1,000 whispering tongues. You lie there, not in comfort, but in awareness. The river is nearby, the fields are nearby, the house is nearby. None of it lets you forget where you are. This is the Louisiana sugar world in the 1850s, rich in appearances, poor in mercy, and organised around an appetite that never seems satisfied. By daylight it shines, by lamplight it pretends. In truth, it is a place where wealth rises from exhaustion, where elegance depends on coercion, and where life for black Americans is narrowed, watched, and worked almost beyond the edge of endurance. And morning will come again, damp and grey, carrying the same smells, the same sounds, and the same demands. You step into the world of sale, transport, and separation, where the journey into Louisiana sugar country begins long before a cane knife touches a stalk. It starts in a market yard, a jail cell, a courthouse sale, a newspaper notice, or a quiet moment when a white man decides that a person can be turned into cash. The violence is not always loud at first. Sometimes it arrives in a ledger book, with neat handwriting and a practiced smile. Sometimes it comes with a handshake. Sometimes it wears a good coat and speaks in a soft voice. That softness means nothing for Black Americans forced toward the sugar parishes in the 1850s. The path often runs through the domestic slave trade, one of the great engines of family destruction in the United States. By this time, the transatlantic slave trade has long been outlawed by the federal government, but slavery within the country is thriving. Traders buy enslaved people in the Upper South and send them southward into expanding plantation regions. Cotton draws many. Sugar draws others, sugar parishes, with their promise of enormous profits. Create a fierce demand for labor. That demand pulls people out of Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Carolinas, and carries them into Louisiana like cargo. The word sold is too small. It sounds tidy, final, almost clerical. The reality is a tearing. You stand in imagination at a slave pen in New Orleans, or in a smaller market farther inland, and the place feels close, hot, and foul with human confinement. The air reeks of sweat, damp boards, stale food, sickness, and fear. Iron scrapes, boots strike packed dirt. A child whimpers, somewhere nearby. Someone tries not to cry and fails anyway. Traders inspect teeth, arms, backs, and posture with the cold attention of horse buyers. Though even that comparison feels insulting to horses. Men are priced for strength. Women are priced for labour, domestic skill, and the possibility of future children. Children are priced according to age, health, and the market's appetite. The body becomes a brochure. A person becomes an investment. It is one of the ugliest transformations in American history. Many people sent into sugar country do not arrive as strangers to pain. They may already have survived years of enslavement on farms and plantations elsewhere. They may have known sale before, punishment before, hunger before. Yet Louisiana often carries a reputation that sharpens dread. The sugar region is widely feared as a place of hard discipline and punishing work. To be sold down the river is not just a phrase. It is a sentence heavy with rumour, grief, and almost mythic terror. The Mississippi becomes more than water. It becomes a road into a harsher life. You can picture the moment a family learns that one or more of them will be sold. It may happen suddenly, after a debt, a death, an estate division, or a planter's bad season. It may happen after weeks of uncertainty, with whispers passing through cabins and yards. A mother watches strangers study her children. A husband notices the trader's eye lingering on his shoulders and arms. A sister hears her name spoken in a low conversation and feels her stomach turn cold. Sleep becomes thin. Every ordinary object looks different. The pot by the hearth, the blanket on the bed, the doorway, the yard. You can lose all of it while standing in it. Some enslavers like to claim they avoided separating families, and occasionally records show sales arranged with that promise. But market logic repeatedly overruled sentiment. Buyers wanted what suited their needs. Traders broke groups apart if doing so increased profit. Children could be sold away from mothers. Spouses could be sent to different states. Teenagers could vanish into coffles with little warning. Elderly people might be left behind, which sounds merciful until you remember what it means to remain while your family is taken. Historians still argue about how often enslavers kept kin groups together when it served plantation stability, compared with how often financial pressure shattered them without hesitation. But for the people living through it, the distinction must have felt painfully thin. Any promise could collapse. Any assurance could be revoked. Love had no standing in the market. The transport south could take several forms. Some people moved overland in chained groups called cofflers, walking for miles under armed supervision. Others travelled by ship along the coast or by steamboat on inland rivers. Each route brought its own horrors. Imagine the road dust coating your mouth, the iron biting your skin, the endless ache in your legs, and the humiliation of being watched as if escape were your most natural thought. Imagine rain soaking your clothes, then drying stiff. Imagine sleeping on rough ground or cramped flooring. Imagine hearing someone nearby sob quietly at night, not from a fresh wound, but from memory. On river transport, the sounds change. Water slaps against wood. Engines throb. Chains clink softly when people shift. Decks smell of mud, tar, smoke, and river rot. The Mississippi is broad and commanding, brown with silt, carrying logs, drift, and the commerce of a growing slave empire. Steamboats can appear elegant from a distance, with bright paint and tall stacks. But beneath that flourish lies a world of hierarchy and confinement. White passengers enjoy fresh air and conversation. Enslaved people being transported experience the vessel as a moving cage. There is a strange cruelty in motion. You are carried towards somewhere you did not choose, while the landscape itself remains magnificent. Riverbanks gleam in the sun, cypress trees rise from still water, birds wheel over marsh and field, towns appear, then fade. Plantation houses come into view and slide away again. The scenery does not care, it keeps being beautiful. That indifference can wound as much as open brutality. When traders describe the people they sell, they often use formulas that feel almost obscene in their blandness. Likely, prime, sound, good breeder, accustomed to field work. Language becomes another weapon, smoothing the edges of violence until it can fit neatly in a newspaper column. One of the more chilling quirks of this trade is how ordinary its paperwork can look. Ads sit beside shipping notices and dry goods announcements, as though human sale belongs naturally among sugar barrels and imported cloth. It is bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does best, making horror look routine. New Orleans stands at the centre of much of this movement. By the 1850s, it is one of the largest slave markets in the nation, a city of commerce, multilingual chatter, elegant facades, muddy streets, and deep moral rot. You can smell coffee, tobacco, horse manure, river water, perfume, and sewage in the same block. You can hear church bells, French voices, English bargaining, wagon wheels, and vendors calling out produce. The city dazzles and degrades at once. Wealth moves through its counting houses. Human beings move through its pens. Some people forced into Louisiana come through private sales rather than public auctions. A planter in the sugar parishes may send an agent to buy labourers directly, selecting for age, strength, or supposed obedience. Buyers often preferred young adults who could survive the workload and produce many years of labour. Women were crucial to this economy, not only for field work and skilled tasks, but because enslavers viewed their childbearing as an increase in property. The cold arithmetic is difficult to look at for long. A woman could be judged by her strength in the field, while also being measured for the future children an enslaver hoped to own. Pregnancy offered no reliable protection. Motherhood did not soften the market. It often sharpened its greed. Children absorbed this world with terrifying speed. Some were too young to understand the words spoken over them, yet old enough to feel the panic in adult bodies. Others knew exactly what sale meant. They learned to read faces, tones, pauses, and footsteps. They learned that adults sometimes cried where children could not see, or thought they could not see. A child on the edge of being sold might cling harder, speak less, or become oddly still. That stillness can be heartbreaking. It is not calm, it is shock trying to make itself useful. The first arrival on a Louisiana sugar plantation could feel like entering a place already prepared to swallow you. The road may be lined with cane fields or half-cleared land. Ditches cut across the property. Outbuildings cluster near the mill. Smoke from furnaces hangs in the air. The plantation house stands apart, giving orders through architecture alone. New arrivals are watched carefully. Existing enslaved communities study them too, often with sympathy, curiosity, and caution. Who are these people? Which state did they come from? Whom did they lose? What skills do they have? Are they injured, frightened, proud, angry, numb? All of those answers matter. The social world of the quarters is not simple. Newly arrived people may bring different speech patterns, food traditions, songs, religious habits, and survival strategies. A person from Virginia might sound different from someone raised in Louisiana. A woman from Maryland may know farming techniques unfamiliar in cane country. A man from the Carolinas may carry stories of swamps, coastlines, or roads no one here has seen. These differences can become sources of connection, tension, or adaptation. Enslaved communities are never blank slates. They are made of real individuals trying to live under pressure, and new arrivals must find footing quickly. There could also be suspicion from the enslavers' side. Traders sometimes exaggerated skill or health. Buyers worried about resistance, illness, or despair reducing the value of their purchase. Plantation managers might test new people immediately, assigning tasks meant to reveal strength, discipline, or knowledge. The scrutiny is intense. Your hands, your pace, your posture, your expression, even your silence can be interpreted. One wrong glance may be called insolence. One slow movement may be called laziness. A stranger has little margin for error. Scholars continue to debate how much cultural adjustment was required for enslaved people moved into Louisiana's sugar zone, especially when language, religion, and local custom differed from what they had known elsewhere. In some places, adaptation may have happened through shared labour, and kin-like ties formed in the quarters. In others, the shock of removal may have remained raw for years. What seems certain is that sale was not a single event. It was a long unfolding wound. Being purchased was only the beginning. The loss kept happening in memory, in dreams, in the sudden reminder of a voice no longer heard. Even names could shift in this process. Traders and buyers sometimes shortened, altered, or replaced names, treating identity as just another piece of property to be reorganized. A person might answer to one name in childhood, another in the market, and yet another on the plantation. But inwardly, private memory could preserve what the record ignored. A true name, a mother's nickname, a father's phrase, a family joke, a place once known by the smell of pine or the sound of a creek. These small private holdings mattered. They were not freedom, but they could be fragments of selfhood hidden from the auction block. Night on the plantation feels especially strange for a new arrival. The sounds are unfamiliar. Frogs call from wet ground. Insects sing in the dark grass. Somewhere far off, machinery settles with groans and clicks. The cabin smells of smoke, old wood, damp clothes, and human closeness. Strangers sleep a few feet away. Someone mutters in dreams. Someone turns over on rough bedding. The darkness is thick, and every thought has a room to grow larger. Where is your family now? Are they alive? Will anyone ever know where you went? Those questions must have floated through countless minds in the sugar parishes. Some people surely held on to hope of reunion, improbable as it often was. Some passed messages when they could. Some memorized names and routes. Some built new bonds because the old ones had been violently broken. Human beings are stubborn that way. The market could move bodies with shocking efficiency, but it could not fully command the heart's refusal to forget. By dawn, the plantation begins to pull the newcomer into its rhythm. Orders come. Tasks begin. There is little room for mourning in public. Grief must walk beside labour, not replace it. That is one of slavery's cruelest demands. You're expected to keep moving while your inner life is in pieces. The cane does not pause for heartbreak. The wagon does not slow for memory. The overseer does not excuse sorrow. The system turns loss into background noise and calls that order. So the sale continues to echo, long after the trader is gone and the money is counted. It lives in the body that wakes in a strange cabin. It lives in the hand that reaches instinctively for someone no longer there. It lives in the habit of listening for a familiar voice that will not answer. In the Louisiana sugar parishes of the 1850s, people are not only forced to labour, they are forced to absorb the aftershock of being uprooted, priced, and delivered into one of the most punishing corners of American slavery, where even the first breath of morning can feel like entering a sentence already pronounced. By the time the sun lifts over the cane, the day has already begun to press down on your body. Morning in the sugar parishes is not gentle. It arrives wet, dim, and close, with a softness in the air that hides how punishing the hours will become. The ground holds last night's moisture. Your shoes, if you have them, pick up mud at once. Your clothes cling early. The sky may look pale and harmless, but the fields are waiting, and the fields are never harmless. You move out with the gang as light spreads slowly across the plantation. The cane stands in rows that seem almost endless, its leaves narrow and sharp, shifting faintly in the breeze. At a distance, the fields can look graceful, almost elegant, like green waves frozen in place. Up close, they feel different. The leaves cut skin. The stalks crowd the body. The earth between rows can be uneven, slick, or baked hard. The beauty lasts until contact. Then it turns practical. Then it turns cruel. This is where much of life is spent. Hour after hour, season after season. The work varies through the year, but it is never light. Sugar cultivation demands attention long before harvest. Fields must be cleared, often with exhausting effort. Roots are dug out. Brushes burned. Ditches are cut to manage water. Soil is worked and shaped. The plantation depends on drainage, because Louisiana's landscape is always one heavy rain away from turning into a swampy trap. So labor is not just about plants. It is about controlling the land itself, forcing it into obedience with shovels, hoes, and aching backs. Planting requires its own discipline. Cane is not usually grown from seed in the ordinary sense. Sections of stalk are laid in furrows and covered, meant to sprout into the next crop. It sounds almost simple when written on a page. In the field, it is repetitive, heavy, and exacting. Bundles must be carried, bent over, placed, and covered again and again. Your hands feel the roughness of the stalk. Your lower back tightens. Mud grips at your feet. Sweat begins before the sun is high. And the sun does get high. When it does, the whole parish seems to thicken. Heat settles on shoulders and neck like a physical weight. The smell of wet earth rises stronger, mixed with the green scent of crushed cane leaves, the salt of sweat, and the faint sourness of clothes worn too long between proper washings. Insects move everywhere. Mosquitoes whine near the ears. Gnats find the eyes. Flies circle any pores. The sound of the field is never silence. You hear blades striking weeds, hoes breaking clods, low breathing, an overseer calling out, someone coughing, someone stumbling, someone gathering themselves and continuing. That last part matters. Continuing is the rule. Hoeing is among the most relentless tasks. The rows must be kept clear. Grass and weeds compete with the cane, so labourers move down long lines with hoes rising and falling in rhythm. It is one of those motions that looks almost mechanical from far away, but feels punishingly human from within. Each swing uses the shoulders, each bend strains the spine, each step asks something from knees and ankles already tired. Over time, the body learns the motion because it has to. The motion does not become easy, it becomes familiar. There is a grim intelligence in that familiarity. You discover how to shift weight without losing pace. You learn how to grip the handle so your palms blister slightly less. You measure the day in patches of shade, in water breaks too brief to satisfy, in the angle of the sun. You notice who is strong, who is fading, who is pregnant, who is ill, who is trying to hide either one. Every field has its social knowledge. The overseer may count output, but the workers count suffering with much greater precision. Children are present in this world too, though not always on the same tasks as adults. Younger children may haul water, shoe animals, gather fuel, or carry messages. Older children can be drawn into field labour with frightening speed. Childhood in the sugar parishes is not protected for long. A child grows into usefulness quickly because the plantation measures worth through labour. Small hands become working hands. Thin shoulders begin carrying loads. A little boy or girl learns the field not as a place of play, but as a place of command. You can imagine the smell of a child's sun-warmed hair mingling with dust and sweat. And that ordinary tenderness makes the setting even harder to bear. Nothing about this system leaves innocence untouched. Even when children are laughing for a moment, or chasing one another near the quarters at dusk, the plantation is already shaping their bodies and futures. It knows what it wants from them. That is one of the bleakest truths in the cane. Field gangs are arranged for efficiency, and that organisation can vary from plantation to plantation. Some places divide workers by age, strength, or skill. Others rely on mixed gangs with different roles assigned within them. Drivers, often enslaved men placed in supervisory positions under white authority. may help keep labour moving. Their role can be deeply difficult and morally painful, balancing survival, coercion, and proximity to punishment. Plantation records often flatten such positions into job descriptions. But real life would have been more tangled. Who was feared? Who was trusted? Who was resented? Who was quietly merciful? All of that lived in daily interactions. Historians still disagree on how much room drivers or other enslaved intermediaries had to soften the routine of labour, or how often they became unwilling tools of the plantation's violence. The truth likely changed from place to place, person to person, day to day. Power under slavery was never equal, but it was often layered. That layering could deepen misery because it forced people into impossible choices inside an impossible system. By midday, the field can feel almost unreal in its brightness. The cane throws back light, water flashes in ditches, heat ripples above the ground. A person may feel both heavy and hollow at once, weighed down by exhaustion, yet strangely emptied by repetition. Food is plain and limited: cornmeal, pork when available, molasses, perhaps some vegetables from garden plots if conditions allow, enough to keep working, seldom enough to make the body truly secure. Hunger does not always appear as sharp pain. Sometimes it is just weakness moving slowly through the limbs. Sometimes it is the dull knowledge that you could eat more and still be asked for more. The work is not only tiring, it is dangerous. Cane leaves can slice exposed skin, tools can slip, feet can turn in ruts and ditches, snakes and insects inhabit the same ground. Rain can transform the field into a slick, sucking mess. The subtropical climate breeds fevers and infections. A cut that seems minor can become serious when combined with dirt, heat, and inadequate care, yet illness does not remove the expectation of labour unless it becomes impossible to ignore. Even then, suspicion can follow. Was the person truly sick, or merely refusing under slavery? Pain itself must often prove it deserves recognition. That proof comes at a cost. Some planters prided themselves on careful management, boasting that good discipline and measured rations protected their workforce. Such claims should be read with great caution. A man could regard himself as practical and humane while still extracting labour through constant threat. Self-congratulation came cheaply in the planter class. One of the stranger little features of plantation culture is how often enslavers mistook efficiency for benevolence. If a worker survived and the crop came in, the master could admire his own moderation. The worker's opinion, rather notably, did not shape the definition. Women labour in these fields alongside men, and often with little concession for pregnancy, nursing, or physical recovery. A woman may bend, hoe, carry, and weed under the same blazing sky, then return to the quarters with cooking, washing, mending, and childcare still ahead of her. Her exhaustion is expected to remain functional. Her body is treated as both labouring machine and reproductive asset. The system is shameless in that way. It asks for strength while draining it. It demands children while punishing the mothers who bear them. Touch becomes its own language in the field. The rough wood of a hoe handle, the sting of sweat running into small cuts, the scrape of cane against forearms, the burn in the shoulders, the ache settling low in the back like a hot stone, the brief relief of water on cracked lips, the mud cooling your feet for a moment before it becomes one more weight to lift. You live very close to the body here, because the body is always being addressed by labour, and always being judged by it. A quick worker may be praised in the shallow, manipulative way plantations offer praise, which is to say only when it serves output. A slower worker may be scolded, threatened, or punished. The standard is rarely fairness. It is whatever the crop, the weather, and the overseer's mood demand that day. There is no stable line where enough becomes enough. That instability keeps fear alive. If the measure keeps shifting, then no one can rest comfortably inside it. There are moments, though, when the field reveals more than punishment. It also reveals the knowledge of the people trapped within it. Enslaved labourers learn the land intimately. They know which patches drain badly, which rows bake hardest in afternoon heat, where insects gather thickest, where a hidden pocket of shade will fall later in the day. They read weather in cloud shape and air pressure. They understand the crop not from planter theory, but from contact. Their expertise is real, although the system refuses to honour it as their own. The plantation steals skill as thoroughly as it steals time. One quirky but telling detail from sugar culture is that planters often obsessed over minute agricultural improvements, writing about cane varieties, manures, row spacing, and drainage techniques as if they were gentlemen scientists in a noble experiment. Meanwhile, the people doing the labour were collapsing in the heat. The contrast is almost absurd. There is always a white man with a notebook somewhere, convinced he has discovered agriculture, while a black woman beside him has already known the field with her whole body for years. Afternoon can feel longer than morning, even when the light begins to soften. Fatigue slows thought. The smell of the cane becomes sweeter where stalks have been cut or bruised, mixed with the rank smell of standing water and the steady human odour of effort. Voices grow fewer because speaking costs energy. Breathing grows louder. The field narrows your senses. You notice the next row, the next step, the next command. Time loses elegance and becomes endurance. Sometimes singing helps, not always loudly, not always in full songs. A line hummed under the breath, a call shared between workers, a rhythm matched to motion. Music in these moments can steady the mind, mark pace, or create a tiny pocket of self within the labour. White observers sometimes recorded these sounds without understanding them, treating song as proof of cheerfulness or natural musicality. It is a familiar failure of imagination. They heard survival and mistook it for contentment. They heard endurance and called it simplicity. As evening nears, bodies begin to look altered by the day. Shirts are dark with sweat. Skins gleam with dust, moisture, and cane scratches. Muscles tremble slightly during pauses. A person may straighten up and feel the spine protest with a kind of shocked stiffness. Yet the return from the fields does not mean rest in any full sense. Tools must be put away, water drawn, fires lit, food prepared, children tended, clothes mended. As day in the cane often ends by opening into more work, still, the walk back carries its own feeling. The sky turns gold, then amber, then a bruised purple over the low land. Birds move through the marsh grass. Smoke rises from cabins in thin threads. Frogs begin their evening chorus from the ditches. For a few minutes, the parish can look almost tender in the fading light. That tenderness is deceptive, but it is not meaningless. People living through slavery were not blind to beauty. They saw the sky. They felt the breeze. They noticed the coolness of evening on overheated skin. The tragedy is not that beauty was absent. The tragedy is that beauty lived beside bondage and could not cancel it. By night, the body remembers everything. The cut on the wrist, the soreness in the thighs, the swollen palms, the hunger not fully answered, the stiffness that comes when you sit down at last. Sleep may come quickly from fatigue, yet it is rarely perfect. Tomorrow already waits in the muscles. The field has a way of entering the body even after darkness falls. It lingers in the joints, in the breath, in the way a person lowers themselves onto bedding as carefully as someone much older. This is the labour that fills the sugar year outside the fever of harvest. It is repetitive, skilled, punishing, and deeply controlled. It wears people down not always through spectacle, but through accumulation. One hot day, then another, one row, then another, one season bending into the next. The work does not need drama to be devastating. Its power lies in its constancy. In the Louisiana sugar parishes, the field is not just where labour happens. It is where the system teaches the body, day by day, exactly how much it believes a human being can be made to give. When grinding season begins, the whole plantation seems to lose whatever little softness it once had. The air changes first. You can smell it before you fully see it. Smoke thickens over the yard. Cane juice, fresh and green one moment, turns sweet and heavy the next. The mill wakes with a groan, then a churn, then a steady mechanical hunger. By daybreak the place already sounds different, as if the plantation has grown teeth. This is the season everyone feels coming. This is the season many fear most. Sugar cane cannot wait politely after cutting. Once it is brought in, it must be crushed and processed quickly before the sweetness fades and the value drops. That urgency reshapes the rhythm of work. Field labour does not stop. Mill labour intensifies. Wagons move in and out. Fires must stay fed. Boilers must be watched. Juice must pass through stages. Skimmings must be cleared. Syrup must thicken at the right moment. Barrels, hogsheads, and tools must be shifted through heat and noise. Time narrows into a command. Move faster. Do not waste. Do not fail. The mill itself is a dangerous world. If the field wears down the body by repetition, the sugar house threatens it with violence from wood, iron, steam, and flame. Cane is fed into rollers that seize and crush the stalks with terrifying force. Belts move, gears turn, axles thump and shudder, steam hisses. Boilers roar beneath wide kettles where juice is heated, skimmed, and reduced. The building smells of wet fibre, hot metal, smoke, ash, sweat, and that strange rich odour of cooking sugar, which is sweet enough to seem almost festive until you remember what powers it. The rollers are among the most feared machines on the plantation. Hands, sleeves, and arms can be caught if a worker moves a fraction too close or tries to feed cane too quickly. Stories of terrible accidents circulate in accounts of sugar production, and the fear of being pulled into the machinery must have hung over every shift. Scholars differ on how frequent such injuries were compared with other plantation dangers, since records can be incomplete and sometimes self-serving, but no one disputes the risk. A machine built to crush tons of cane does not pause out of kindness for human flesh, and the machine never gets tired. That is part of the cruelty. Human beings do. During grinding season, work often runs far into the night. On many plantations, it continues around the clock, with teams rotating through the mill, boiling house and yards. Though rotating can sound more orderly than the reality. Sleep comes in fragments. A person may snatch an hour or two, then be called again. The body loses its sense of proper day and night. Firelight replaces sunset. Boiler glow replaces moonlight. You can imagine stepping from dark yard into a sugar house lit by flame, where shadows jump on the walls and the kettles throw back fierce orange light. Faces shine with sweat. Eyes look glazed with exhaustion. Every surface seems sticky, hot, or sharp. The boiling house is its own climate. Stand near the kettles and the heat wraps around you at once, wet and suffocating. Your skin feels slick. Your shirt clings. The air tastes faintly of smoke and sweetness, with an undertone of burned residue and damp wood. Men assigned to the kettles or to skimming and carrying hot liquid must move with judgment, balance, and speed. There is skill here, considerable skill, though the plantation rarely honours it in moral terms. Sugar boiling requires attention to colour, consistency, timing, and temperature. Experienced workers know how juice changes as it reduces. They know when a batch is not right. They know what can go wrong. That knowledge can save the crop. It cannot save the worker from the system. Some planters prided themselves on having especially fine sugar boilers, men whose expertise made the difference between profit and waste. A skilled boiler could be valuable enough to earn a measure of grudging regard from the master, which of course did not change the fact that he remained enslaved. It is one of slavery's bitter contradictions. The system depends on intelligence, judgment, and craft. In the people it claims are inferior, it steals brilliance, then congratulates itself on efficiency. Outside, the yard stays busy too. Cane arrives from the fields in wagons, piled high and rustling. Drivers shout. Mules shift in harness. Wheels grind over ruts. Bagasse, the shredded remains of crushed cane, accumulates in heaps and may be dried or reused for fuel. The whole plantation becomes a chain of linked motions, each one dependent on the next. If the field slows, the mill starves. If the mill clogs, cut cane spoils. If the boiling house misjudges a batch, money is lost. All of that pressure falls hardest on the enslaved labourers who keep each stage moving with their bodies. A strange feature of this season is how industrial it can feel. People often imagine slavery as a purely agricultural system, all sun and soil and rows of crops. Sugar upsets that picture. Here you have something closer to a factory fused to a plantation. Work happens in fields, but also in a noisy processing complex where timing, machinery, and heat govern every hour. This is one reason sugar earned such a dark reputation. It demanded the worst of both worlds. The wear of field labour, the hazards of industry, the pressure of a crop that decays if you let it rest. Women are drawn into this intensity too, though the exact tasks may vary from plantation to plantation. Some labour in the fields cutting cane or handling loads. Some work in the yards or around the processing area. Some continue domestic labour under conditions made harder by the non-stop schedule. Cooking, washing, tending children, and nursing the sick do not disappear because the mill is running. They become part of an already overburdened life. The plantation consumes labour from every direction, as if human energy were a fuel source to be burned without limit. Night shifts carry a special kind of misery. Exhaustion changes the senses. Firelight makes faces look hollow and strange. The pounding of the mill becomes almost hypnotic. Sparks lift from the furnaces and vanish in the dark. Insects swarm toward warmth and flame. Ash settles on skin and clothing. A worker may feel both wide awake from danger and half asleep from fatigue. It is a terrible combination. One blink too long, one misstep near boiling liquid, one hand too near the rollers, and the cost can be permanent. Historians still argue over the exact organisation of labour during grinding on different plantations, especially how shifts were divided and how much sleep workers truly received during the peak weeks. Plantation journals sometimes present a more controlled picture than memoirs or later testimony suggest. Owners liked records that made them seem competent. Workers remembered chaos, fear, and physical collapse. The broad truth is clearer than the finer points. Grinding seasons stretched bodies to the edge. Whether a person slept 2 hours or 3, the system was brutal by design. Cutting cane in harvest time is punishing in its own right. Stalks are heavy, leaves slash exposed skin. Knives must move quickly. Chopping low, trimming tops, clearing the stalks for loading. The field can smell bright and raw where cane has been cut. A green sweetness mixed with earth and sweat. Arms burn from swinging. Hands ache from gripping, legs push through stubble and mud. All the while, workers know the mill is waiting. The cut cane has to reach the crushers. Delay means loss. So urgency travels backward from the sugar house into the field, making every motion faster, harder, less forgiving. There are times when the plantation at night must have looked almost theatrical from a distance. Flames glowing from the boiling house, wagons creaking through the yard, smoke drifting low, figures moving in and out of lamplight, the river nearby carrying black reflections. It could seem dramatic, even grand, to an outsider with no conscience or no imagination. Planters occasionally wrote about grinding with a sort of excited pride, as if it were the glorious climax of agricultural enterprise. They admired the machinery, the output, the bustle. One can almost hear them boasting over dinner about yields and improvements. While outside, a man tries not to faint beside a kettle. That gap between description and reality matters. It is part of the violence. Language can polish a furnace. It cannot cool it. Enslaved children experienced the season too, even when not assigned to the most dangerous tasks. They saw adults leaving before dawn and returning at odd hours. They heard the machinery all through the night. They smelled smoke in their bedding and on people's hair. They learned that harvest time changed moods, sharpened tempers, and reduced rest. A child old enough to carry water or run messages could become part of the frantic circulation around the mill. A younger child might simply wait in the cabin, listening to the outside noises and sensing the strain in every adult face. There are quirky details in some plantation records that reveal how obsessed enslavers were with technical improvement during this season. A planter might proudly note a new type of clarifying agent, a more efficient roller, or a refined sequence of kettles, as though the entire enterprise were an elegant scientific challenge. He could spend pages on the quality of the sugar and scarcely mention the workers who made it. That imbalance is almost surreal. You end up reading about syrup density with more emotional emphasis than human suffering. The documents tell on themselves, though perhaps not in the way their writers intended. Even rest, when it comes, is contaminated by the mill. A worker lying down after a shift may still hear the pounding in the head. The smell of smoke clings to the blanket. Hands may tremble from overuse. Feet pulse with heat. The body cannot fully settle because it expects to be called again. Sleep becomes shallow, closer to collapse than repose. Then a voice, a bell, a knock, or the simple logic of the schedule draws you back into the glow and noise. Food during this period may become even more functional than usual. Eat quickly, drink when you can, keep moving, molasses, cornmeal, salt pork, perhaps some vegetables if available, all of it shaped less by comfort than by necessity. Yet the cruel irony of sugar labour is always present. The workers stand inside an industry of sweetness while living with hunger, haste, and bodily depletion. They produce abundance for others and exhaustion for themselves. Few systems announce their moral ugliness so clearly. The mill also creates a different social atmosphere from the open field. People work closer together in confined spaces, under sharper supervision, with louder sounds and greater danger. Small exchanges matter. A warning shouted at the right second, a hand steadying a load, a glance that says someone is near collapse. Under slavery, solidarity often has to disguise itself as practicality. Open defiance can be deadly. Quiet care must travel in ordinary motions. A person wipes sweat from a brow and also checks whether another can still stand. A joke passes quickly in the yard, thin as thread, but enough to keep a mind from breaking for one more hour. That humour could be dry, even dark, probably very dark. It had earned the right. By the last stretch of a grinding night, time becomes slippery. The kettles still boil, the furnaces still need feeding, the rollers still turn, outside. The air cools slightly, but the boiling house remains infernal. Your eyes sting from smoke. Your arms feel detached from the rest of you, as if they belong to the work more than to yourself. The sweet smell grows cloying, almost sickening, because sweetness in excess loses innocence. It becomes thick, oppressive, menacing, and still the crop comes in. Still the wagons roll. Still the plantation asks for more. This is why so many people remembered sugar as something close to a death sentence. Not because every moment was spectacularly violent, though some were. Not because every plantation was identical, though all were built on bondage, but because grinding season compressed the entire logic of slavery into one furious burst of labour, danger and sleepless control. Here the cane had to be cut, crushed, boiled, skimmed, cooled, packed, and sent to market before time stole its value. Since the crop could not rest, the people were denied rest too. The machinery set the tempo, profit set the terms, the body paid the price. When dawn finally reaches the sugar house again, it does not bring renewal. It simply reveals the smoke more clearly, catches the sheen on the kettles, and shows the workers still moving through the sticky heat. Morning light through the cracks in the walls can look soft for a second. Then a voice calls out, a wagon rattles in, and the relentless business of turning cane into sugar continues, fed by human stamina that the plantation has already spent as if it were endless. By now you can feel how fear settles into a place long before anyone raises a hand. In the sugar parishes, punishment is not only an event, it is an atmosphere. It waits in the yard, in the field, beside the cabins, and in the pauses between one order and the next. A person learns to hear it in footsteps, in the pitch of a voice, in the sudden silence that falls when an overseer appears. The body becomes alert to danger even while exhausted. That alertness never fully leaves. It begins with hunger, not always starvation in the dramatic sense. Something steadier, meaner, more useful to the people in charge. Rations on sugar plantations varied, but they were often plain, limited, and controlled. Cornmeal formed the base of many diets. Salt pork might appear in measured amounts. Molasses could be issued. Sometimes there were peas, sweet potatoes, or other vegetables, especially if people were allowed small garden plots or managed to cultivate them in the little time left after work. But food was never simply nourishment. It was part of management. The plantation decided how much, how often, and under what conditions. The body was fed enough to work, seldom enough to feel secure. That difference matters. A person can survive on too little for quite a long time. The body keeps going, it just pays for it. You imagine evening in the quarters after a day in the cane. The fire is low. A pot simmers with something thin familiar. Smoke clings to the rafters. The smell is comforting only because hunger makes almost anything comforting. Children hover close, drawn by heat and the chance of a full spoon. Adults eat with the quick economy of people who cannot waste time or energy. Even in this moment, rest does not settle fully. Tomorrow's labour is already inside the meal. The ration is not a gift. It is fuel issued by force. Clothing works the same way. Plantation issue garments were often coarse, badly fitted, and insufficient for the demands of the climate and labour. In cooler months they might fail to keep out damp cold. In hotter months, they trapped sweat and rubbed the skin raw. Shoes, when provided, could be stiff, poorly made, or quickly ruined by mud and field work. Many people went barefoot at least part of the time. Imagine the feel of wet ground between your toes at dawn, then the sting of stubble, stones, and rough boards by afternoon. Imagine clothing that never quite dries, or dries stiff with sweat and smoke. Comfort is not part of the budget, neither is dignity, yet people kept searching for both. Enslaved women patched garments, washed fabric, braided hair, and adjusted what little they had with extraordinary skill. Men repaired shoes, mended tools, or altered clothes when they could. A headscarf tied neatly, a shirt made to last one more season, a child washed carefully before sleep, these things could carry quiet meaning. They did not erase the degradation of plantation issue, they answered it under slavery. Care for the body became one of the places where humanity pushed back against imposed neglect. Still, neglect remained everywhere. Cabins were often cramped, draughty, smoky, and vulnerable to weather. Beds might be little more than pallets, rough boards, or straw ticks. Vermin could be a constant problem. Dampness settled into walls, blankets, and lungs. You can hear coughing in the night and know it is not a small thing. In the sugar country climate, moisture lingers, mould spreads, and sickness finds easy paths through crowded spaces. Fever, chills, stomach troubles, respiratory illness. Skin infections all could move through the quarters with ruthless efficiency. Medical care existed, but it was not designed around the comfort or autonomy of the enslaved. Planters often had a financial interest in preserving labourers, which meant some plantations called in doctors more readily than others. Yet treatment was always filtered through ownership. A sick person was examined as property as much as patient. Rest might be granted only when labour became impossible. Remedies could be crude, painful, or delayed. Folk healing traditions, herbal knowledge, midwifery, and communal care remained deeply important because formal care was inconsistent and never free of control. Historians continue to debate mortality patterns in Louisiana sugar regions and whether certain plantations were distinctly worse than others in diet, disease, and punishment. Records can be patchy, and owners had every reason to hide what reflected badly on them. But broad evidence points toward harsh conditions, especially where labour pressure, poor housing, and inadequate nutrition combined. Sugar work stressed the body. Fear stressed it too. The result was a life lived close to depletion. Punishment gave that depletion a sharper edge. Whipping was the most notorious form, and with reason. It was public enough to terrify, intimate enough to humiliate, and common enough to structure behaviour even when not visible. The crack of a whip could travel across a yard with shocking clarity. The sound itself did part of the work. It warned, it anticipated, it entered the mind before the lash ever touched skin. People knew what it meant. Children knew. Adults knew. The plantation wanted them to know. Some punishments were formal, delivered after accusation or perceived offence. Others could be immediate, given for slowness, talking back, lateness, or any behaviour an overseer chose to call insolent. The standards were unstable because instability increased control. If the rules shift with a white man's mood, then everyone must stay anxious. Anxiety becomes a method. There is dark cunning in that. Slavery did not rely only on brute force. It relied on unpredictability. and unpredictability exhausts the mind. A person may work while also calculating tone, posture, pace, and glance. That is labour too. Not all punishment was whipping. People could be shackled, confined, deprived of food, forced into extra work, threatened with sale, or separated from loved ones. Women could be punished in ways that exploited their vulnerability as both workers and mothers. Men could be targeted to break pride or assert racial domination. Children could be beaten or terrorized into obedience long before they were physically grown. The plantation had many tools. Some left marks on the skin, others worked by entering the imagination and staying there. Threat of sale was particularly powerful because it struck at the deepest bonds. An enslaver did not always need to carry out the threat. He only had to make it believable. A mother warned that a child could be sold. A husband reminded that a wife could disappear into another parish. A teenager told he might be sent away if he did not submit. These threats moved through the quarters like bad weather, chilling everything. Violence against one body could frighten many others. Violence against family could frighten the soul itself. One deeply strange feature of plantation life is how easily punishment could sit beside claims of benevolence. An enslaver might order a whipping in the morning and speak of Christian duty by afternoon. He might punish a woman for supposed laziness and later boast of providing for his people. The moral self-deception is astonishing, though perhaps it should not be. Human beings can adapt to almost any contradiction if profit, status, and habit all point in the same direction. The sugar planter often lived inside a polished fantasy in which coercion was discipline and domination was care. Religious language sometimes intensified that fantasy. Sermons or household prayers could speak of obedience, order, and divine hierarchy. Some planters encouraged carefully managed forms of worship among the enslaved, hoping religion would promote submission, yet faith did not remain under white control so easily. Black spiritual life drew on scripture, memory, song, and communal interpretation in ways that could nourish dignity rather than compliance. A biblical story about bondage could sound very different in the quarters than in the big house. The same words could carry opposite meanings depending on who held the power and who carried the chains. Fear also shaped movement. On many plantations, passes were required for travel off the property. Patrols, neighbours, and local white authorities helped police black mobility. A person walking at the wrong hour, on the wrong road, without the right paper, could be stopped, questioned, beaten, jailed, or worse. So even the open road did not easily feel open. The landscape itself became guarded. Trees, levees, bayous, and roads all lay under a system of scrutiny. To move through the world required calculation. To stay still required calculation too. The body under surveillance never fully relaxes. That tension leaves traces. You can sense it in the way voices lower when danger is near, in the way people read one another's faces before speaking, in the way children learn when not to ask questions, in the way silence becomes both shield and burden. White observers often misread this silence as dullness or natural reserve. They did not grasp that silence could be discipline, caution, grief, or intelligence. Under constant threat, speech becomes expensive. You spend it carefully. Even leisure, when it appeared, was hemmed in by fear. A dance, a gathering, a visit between cabins, a Sunday pause. None of it happened outside the plantation's authority. Too much joy could be interpreted as disorder. Too much movement could be called plotting. Too much confidence could provoke a response. So people learned the exhausting art of partial expression, laugh, but not too boldly, gather, but stay alert, sing, but know who is listening. The emotional life of the quarters had to bend around danger without surrendering to it. Scholars still argue over how much room existed for negotiation between enslaved people and plantation authority in daily matters, like food allotments, garden time, and discipline. Some plantations may have offered narrow bargaining spaces, especially when labour was scarce or skilled workers were hard to replace. But those spaces never altered the basic truth. Any concession rested on power that could be withdrawn at once. A small kindness under slavery was not freedom. It was dependency wearing a softer face. One quiet but telling detail from plantation accounts is how often losses of food, tools, or work time were described by enslavers as moral offences rather than understandable acts of survival. If a hungry person took extra provisions, it became theft. If an overworked person slowed down, it became insolence. If a mother protected a child, it could be framed as defiance. The planter class wrote itself as guardian of order, while the people enduring that order were blamed for the damage done to them by it. It is a neat trick, morally speaking. First create misery, then punish its symptoms. Dogs were sometimes part of this world too, used in patrols or in the capture of runaways. Their barking at night could send a particular kind of fear through the quarters. Not every bark meant danger, but uncertainty made each one matter. You lie awake and listen. Is it only an animal roaming the yard? Or men out searching? Is someone missing? Did someone try to leave? The darkness holds questions, and questions can be frightening enough on their own. Children grew up learning all of this by feel. They learned which adults could offer comfort, which white faces meant trouble, which sounds warned of punishment, which places near the quarters felt safest. They learned to carry water quietly, to move quickly when called, to watch before speaking. Some childhood habits that might look like shyness were really training for survival. A lowered gaze, a still body, a careful answer. These were not signs of innocence untouched. They were signs of innocence being disciplined by terror. And yet fear never worked perfectly. That is important. The system wanted obedience, but it never achieved total control. People still hid food. They still nursed one another. They still exchanged warnings, passed news, protected children, and created little corners of tenderness within the harshest conditions. A woman might save the better part of a meal for someone weaker. A man might repair a shoe for a neighbour after dark. An elder might soothe a frightened child with a story whispered low against the night sounds. These acts do not look grand in a ledger. They matter enormously in a life. By evening, in the sugar parish, the smell of smoke drifts low across the cabins. The air cools only a little. Mud clings to hems and ankles. A scraped hand stings in the washwater. Somewhere a baby fusses, then settles. Somewhere an adult sits longer than necessary before standing again, because the body has only so many movements left in it. Hunger may ease, but not disappear. Fear may soften, but not depart. Punishment may not fall tonight, yet its possibility lies down beside everyone anyway. That is how control becomes complete enough to function, not because every hour contains violence, but because every hour is shaped by its possibility. In the Louisiana sugar parishes of the 1850s, food, clothing, shelter, movement, speech, and even family feeling all passed through the shadow of punishment. Fear was baked into the daily structure like heat in the cane fields, invisible at times but always there. It entered the muscles, the stomach, the breath, and the thoughts people carried into sleep. It made the ordinary unstable. It made survival itself a form of work. When the labour ends for the day, you might expect the plantation to loosen its grip a little. It does not. It only changes texture. The fields fall quieter, the overseer's voice recedes, and the sky softens over the cane. But life in the quarters begins its own demanding rhythm. Evening is not freedom. It is the narrow strip of time where people try to live as human beings inside a system designed to reduce them to labour. That effort takes many forms. Some are practical, some are tender, some are so quiet they could be missed by anyone not looking closely. The cabins are usually small, rough, and crowded, yet they hold worlds the plantation cannot fully see. Firelight moves along plank walls, smoke curls upward and lingers in the rafters. The smell inside is a mixture of ash, damp wood, cooked cornmeal, worn cloth, sweat, and sometimes herbs hung to dry or tucked into corners for healing. A pot bubbles softly. Someone shakes out a blanket. Someone else rubs sore hands, pressing life back into swollen fingers. Children lean against adults with that heavy evening trust that appears even in harsh places. You feel the texture of the hour in small things, the rough edge of a stool, the warmth of a child's head against a shoulder, the grit still trapped under a fingernail from the field, the relief of sitting, even when the back protests, the cooling air against skin that has held the day's heat too long. These little sensations matter because so much of plantation life is made of endurance. Any moment that feels briefly self-directed can become precious. Family in the quarters is both deeply real and constantly vulnerable. Some people live with spouses and children. Others have had family sold away and build kinship through friendship, age, shared birthplace, or common suffering. An older woman may become an aunt to children not born from her body. A man may be called uncle or brother because the language of blood is not wide enough for the bonds necessity creates. This chosen kinship does not replace loss. It helps people survive beside it. The plantation can own a body. It cannot fully command belonging. Belonging finds cracks. A child learns that from the way adults gather around sickness, hunger, or grief. Someone shares food without making a display of it. Someone watches a baby while the mother tends a pot or washes clothes. Someone repairs a broken stool or mends a shirt in dim light. Someone with aching knees still reaches down to tie a headscarf properly on a little girl because dignity has not been surrendered. Care travels hand to hand. It is rarely easy. It is often costly, but it is there. Women carry much of this burden, though never alone. They cook, wash, patch garments, soothe fevers, braid hair, settle quarrels, and carry memory through ordinary speech. Men too contribute by repairing tools, cutting firewood, fishing when possible, tending gardens, and offering protection where they can. The division is not always neat, because necessity rarely is. If a task must be done, someone does it. The plantation may try to organize people only as labor units, but the quarters insist on a more human arrangement, one built from need, affection, and stubbornness. Gardens can be especially important. On some plantations, enslaved people managed small plots where they raised greens, beans, sweet potatoes, or other vegetables. A few chickens might scratch nearby if allowed. The soil under moonlight, the smell of leaves crushed between fingers, the sight of something growing under your own care, all of this offered more than extra food. It offered a fragment of agency. A row of greens could not undo bondage, obviously, but tending something for your own household, however precarious the claim, had meaning. Scholars still disagree over how much independence such garden plots truly gave in different parts of the South, since rules varied and planters could withdraw permission at any time. In some places, gardens helped sustain families materially. In others, they functioned as one more way for owners to shift responsibility for feeding the enslaved. Both things could be true at once. Under slavery, even useful concessions were entangled with exploitation. Still, the labor of planting and gathering food for one's own people carried a dignity the plantation did not intend. Night brings sound, always sound. Frogs in the ditches, insects in the grass, a distant dog, the soft scrape of a spoon against a pot, murmured conversation near a doorway, a baby drifting in and out of sleep, laughter, sometimes sudden and bright, then quickly lowered. You can imagine how careful joy must be in a place like this. Not absent, careful, measured against risk, protected by timing, and yet laughter survives. That feels important, more than important. A joke at the end of a punishing day can be a kind of refusal. A teasing remark over burnt bread, a dry comment about some puffed-up overseer, a sideways observation about white pretensions. All of it can cut through fear for a moment. Gentle sarcasm belongs here too. It probably belonged here long before any narrator arrived to notice it. Human beings under pressure develop wit because wit helps them keep an inner self that power cannot easily flatten. Music also moves through the quarters, though not always in grand performances. Sometimes it is a hum under the breath while stirring a pot. Sometimes it is a low song shared between adults after the children settle. Sometimes clapping and rhythm animate a gathering on a night when work eases enough to allow it. Song can carry memory, prayer, warning, grief, and humour all at once. White listeners often heard only melody, which was their usual mistake. They mistook complexity for simplicity because simplicity was convenient for them. Religious life often deepens in these private or semi-private spaces. Prayer may be spoken softly over a sick child or whispered alone before sleep. Scriptural stories can circulate in conversation, not as cold doctrine, but as living language, deliverance, wandering, captivity, judgment, promise. These themes resonate differently when your own life is controlled by force. An enslaver may preach obedience from a polished Bible, but in the quarters the same Bible can speak of endurance with teeth in it. Faith becomes shelter, but also interpretation. Sometimes gatherings take on a hushed intensity, especially when the community shares news, mourns a death, or seeks comfort after punishment. A room full of tired people can feel more sacred than any formal chapel. The candle burns low, smoke lingers near the ceiling. Someone begins a prayer. Another person answers softly. A child sleeps through half of it, on a lap, cheek warm, breathing slow. The exhausted body and the searching spirit exist together. Neither is a luxury. Quirky details from travellers' accounts sometimes reveal how much white observers fail to understand these spaces. A visitor might remark on a neat cabin garden, a polished gourd, a carefully folded quilt, or the graceful way women dressed one another's hair on Sundays, as if these were charming curiosities. Charming, as though beauty created under oppression were merely decorative. In truth, such details can signal discipline, pride, and cultural continuity. A tidy doorway in the quarters may look small to outsiders. To those living there, it could be a statement. You do not own my whole self. Not tonight. Not in this corner. Not in the way I tie this cloth, stir this pot, comfort this child, or remember this song. Memory itself is a form of resistance. People remember family names, places left behind, recipes, remedies, proverbs, and stories that the plantation has no use for. An elder may tell a child about a county in Virginia, a mother in Maryland, a road in Kentucky, a river crossing in Tennessee. Another may preserve older echoes that travelled through generations from Africa, transformed but not erased. These memories do not always arrive as formal lessons. They come in phrases, habits, tastes, turns of speech, fragments of prayer, or ways of carrying the body. Culture does not survive only in monuments. Often it survives in repetition. Hair care is one of those quiet continuities. Braiding, wrapping, oiling, parting, and arranging hair take time and skill, yet they offer more than appearance. The touch of patient hands on the scalp can soothe a tired body. The style itself can affirm selfhood. A child sitting still between an elder's knees learns more than grooming. The child learns care, rhythm, and belonging. The plantation may see only a head. The community sees a person being tended into dignity. Resistance in the quarters is often subtle because subtlety keeps people alive. Someone hides food. Someone slows a task just enough to reclaim a breath. Someone passes along information about patrols or local tensions. Someone protects another's secret. Someone feigns ignorance when knowledge would endanger the group. These are not dramatic rebellions with flags and speeches. They are daily evasions, shields, adjustments, and refusals. Small acts matter in a world designed to leave little room for action at all. Historians still argue over how to classify such behaviour. Was it resistance, negotiation, accommodation, or simply survival? The categories can blur. A mother preserving extra food for her child may not be trying to challenge the institution in any grand sense, but she's certainly refusing its indifference. A man who keeps a private prayer meeting may not be plotting rebellion, yet he is sustaining a moral world beyond the plantation's authority under slavery. Survival often carried a resistant edge precisely because the system wanted submission so total. There are also moments of more visible defiance in domestic life. An argument, a refusal, a sharply delivered answer, a broken tool that broke a little too conveniently, a task completed slower than expected. These acts were risky, and the risks were understood. That is why the quieter forms of self-assertion often mattered more. Resistance did not need to announce itself to be real. Sometimes it lived in the decision to keep loving people the market had declared disposable. Children absorb all of this. They learn songs before they understand every word. They memorize the feel of being held while adults talk in low tones nearby. They notice who is generous, who is dangerous, who carries authority with kindness, and who carries it with fear. In the quarters, childhood is burdened. but not empty. Games still appear in scraps of evening. Curiosity survives. So does affection. A child may fall asleep to the sound of laughter, prayer, and tired voices blending with the insects outside. That mixture becomes part of the child's world as surely as the field becomes part of the body. The atmosphere of the quarters changes on special occasions, though special under slavery remains a fragile term. A marriage recognized by the community, a naming, a holiday, a rare pause in labour. Each can bring more food if available, more song, more visitors between cabins, more visible joy. Clothing's adjusted with care. A head wrap sits just right. His shirt is brushed down. Someone produces an instrument or makes rhythm with hands and feet for a short time. The cabins do not merely absorb the day's punishment. They generate something else. Something warmer, something claimed, something almost impossible, given the conditions, and therefore all the more moving. You sit in that warm darkness and understand that the quarters are not simply places of deprivation. They are also places of creation, not freedom, certainly, not safety in any complete sense, but creation, relationship, language, ritual, humour, memory, and practical care are made here over and over, night after night, by people the system insists on treating as property. That insistence fails, and it fails most clearly in the spaces where black life continues to shape itself, according to values deeper than plantation logic. By late evening the fire burns low, the smells grow softer, ash, damp wood, worn fabric, skin warmed by work and now slowly cooling. A child shifts in sleep, an adult rubs a tired knee. Someone whispers one last thought into the dark, and someone else answers with a sound too low to make out but full of understanding. Outside, the cane rustles faintly in the night wind. Inside, people gather themselves for another day without surrendering everything that makes them human. That is no small thing. It's a quiet triumph, and in the sugar parishes, quiet triumphs could mean the difference between merely being kept alive and truly remaining a person. In the sugar parishes, black women carry a burden so heavy that even the plantation seems to take it for granted. Their labour is expected, their endurance is expected, their silence is expected, their fertility is expected, their grief is expected too, though no one in power would call it that. A woman is supposed to rise before dawn, work under command, return to the quarters, feed others, tend children, and begin again the next day as if the body were an obedient machine. The plantation asks everything at once, and then asks more. That is the first truth. The second is worse. The system does not merely exploit women. It uses their womanhood as another field to be worked. In the cane fields, women labour beside men in conditions that are often nearly identical in physical demand. They hoe, plant, weed, cut, haul, bend, lift, and endure the same heat, dampness, insects, and fatigue. The Louisiana sugar region does not have much patience for delicate ideas about womanhood when profit is at stake. A planter may speak politely over dinner about ladies and refinement, while the women he owns swing hoes in wet soil and stagger home with swollen hands. White femininity is protected, black womanhood is mined. The contrast is brutal. It is also very revealing. The body of an enslaved woman is treated as both worker and asset in another sense. She's expected to produce labour in the field and, in the eyes of enslavers, future labour through childbirth. That cold arithmetic follows her through the years. A young woman may be valued for strength and health. A married woman may be watched for signs of pregnancy with the ugly interest of an owner tracking inventory. A mother nursing an infant may still be pushed toward work before her body is recovered. None of this is accidental. The plantation economy folds reproduction into its logic with shameless efficiency. Pregnancy offers little shelter. It may slow some tasks in some places. It does not remove the woman from danger. Accounts from slavery show that pregnant women were often still required to work deep into pregnancy, though conditions varied by plantation and by the calculations of the enslaver. Some owners believed overwork threatened the child they hoped to own, so they made limited adjustments. Others demanded labour until the last possible moment. Even when allowances were made, they were rarely generous. A pregnant woman might still stand long hours, move through fields, carry loads, or remain exposed to heat and poor food. Her comfort was not the point. Her output was. Historians still debate how much local variation existed in the treatment of pregnant women on Louisiana sugar plantations, especially compared with cotton regions where surviving records are sometimes fuller. Yet the broad pattern is clear enough. The enslaved mother's body belonged, in law and practice, to someone else. Any mercy she received was conditional, strategic, and fragile. Childbirth itself could be terrifying. Imagine going into labour after months of hard field work, underfed, overtired, and living in a cramped cabin with little privacy. The air is thick with smoke and damp. The bed is rough. Pain comes in waves while the sounds of plantation life continue outside. A midwife or experienced older woman may help. Such women carried crucial knowledge, practical and emotional, and their presence could mean the difference between panic and steadiness. They knew herbs, positions, rhythms of encouragement, signs of danger. They knew how to make a room feel human, even when the system around it was not. That knowledge mattered. Official medicine did not own wisdom. Women did. Still, childbirth remained perilous. Infection, hemorrhage, difficult labour, and infant loss were all real threats. The plantation did not pause in reverence because a new life was arriving. A mother might be given little time before being expected back at work. An infant could be left in the care of older children, elderly women, or other mothers while the day's labour went on. The emotional violence of this arrangement is easy to miss if you read only plantation records. A line in a ledger cannot capture the feeling of a woman hearing her baby cry from a distance while she continues in the field. Or worse, not hearing the baby at all. That silence would have its own terror. Black women in the sugar parishes also face sexual exploitation, a subject both central and often poorly documented because power hides its own ugliness. Enslaved women could be harassed, coerced, assaulted, or forced into intimate vulnerability by enslavers, overseers, traders, or other white men with access to plantation space. The law offered little protection. Social custom offered even less. White men could cloak abuse in secrecy, denial, or the ordinary entitlement of slaveholding society. The woman, meanwhile, carried the physical risk, the humiliation, the fear, and the consequences. Pregnancy resulting from assault added another layer of cruelty. A child could be both beloved and inseparable from violence. Historians and descendants alike wrestle with this reality because it resists neat categories. Human feeling does not organize itself according to the moral convenience of archives. A mother might fiercely love a child born through coercion, while also carrying pain no record names. The plantation could convert sexual domination into property growth, which is perhaps one of the most repellent truths in the whole system. White mistresses occupied an uneasy place in this world. Some resented enslaved women, especially those working inside the household, with jealousy, suspicion, or aggression shaped by the racial and gender hierarchy they benefited from, but did not control fully. Others might show what they considered kindness, though it remained kindness within ownership. Very few challenged the basic structure. Household intimacy did not guarantee safety. In fact, it could sharpen scrutiny. A woman working near the planter family might be watched more closely, judged more harshly, or made to absorb the tensions of white domestic life without any right to defend herself. There is a strange hypocrisy here that almost glows from the historical record. White Southern culture loved to praise womanly delicacy, moral purity, and maternal tenderness. But those ideals were largely reserved for white women of status. Black women were expected to labour like men, nurture like saints, endure punishment without complaint, and absorb sexual danger without recognition. The same society could praise motherhood while tearing black mothers from children through sale or overwork. It could praise virtue while making vice profitable. Few moral performances in history have been staged with such confidence. Inside the quarters, women were often the ones stitching together stability from almost nothing. They cooked after labouring all day. They washed clothing with tired arms. They cleaned wounds, soothed fevers, mediated arguments, and comforted children frightened by punishments they barely understood. They remembered family lines. They carried songs. They passed on remedies, food ways, prayers, and habits of survival. A woman might finish a day bent from fieldwork and still be the person everyone turned to at night when a child coughed. A birth began, or grief became too large to hold alone. That work did not end. It changed shape. It deepened after dark. Some women also found ways to protect one another. Advice could pass in whispers. Warnings could be given about a man's intentions, an overseer's temper, or a mistress's mood. Shared childcare helped mothers manage impossible schedules. Midwives and older women formed networks of care that mattered profoundly, even if the archive records them only in passing. Much of women's strength under slavery survives precisely in these half-visible traces. A name on a list, a remembered birth, a note about nursing, a story passed down in a family. The record is incomplete because the women were not important to the people keeping it. That does not make them less central. It makes the record smaller than their lives. Scholars still argue over how to describe enslaved women's agency under conditions so coercive. Some emphasize resistance, others endurance, others the need to avoid modern heroic language that can accidentally flatten suffering. All of those cautions have value. But one thing is certain. Black women were never merely passive victims in the way white supremacist thinking preferred to imagine them. They acted, judged, loved, protected, grieved, negotiated, concealed, created, and sometimes openly defied. They did all this inside a system designed to constrain every breath. A quirky but telling detail appears in some descriptions of plantation life. White observers occasionally praised enslaved women for being cheerful nurses, skilled cooks, or naturally maternal, as if these capacities floated up from instinct alone. Convenient that it allowed slaveholders to enjoy women's labour while ignoring the discipline, intelligence, and emotional cost behind it. A woman who soothed a feverish child after 12 hours of work was not displaying simple natural sweetness. She was performing difficult care under crushing conditions. The sentimentality of white memory often tried to soften that truth into something decorative. The sensory world of women's labour is its own history. The sting of lye in washwater, the rough drag of fabric against cracked hands, the weight of a sleeping child carried from one place to another, the smell of cornmeal cooking in a smoky cabin while milk lets down painfully because an infant is not near enough, the feel of braided hair sliding through tired fingers, the dampness of a nightdress in Louisiana heat, the ache in the lower back that never fully leaves after years of fieldwork and childbirth. These are not minor details. They are part of the structure of life. Children often saw women at the centre of their world, even when fathers, brothers, uncles, and grandfathers were present and deeply important too. Women's voices marked the rhythm of mornings and evenings. Their hands tied clothes, portioned meals, washed faces, and laid down rules. Their stories shaped memory. Their anger could protect. Their tenderness could steady. For children growing up under slavery, a mother or mother figure was often the first defence against a world that offered none. That defence could not always save them from sale, punishment, or hunger. It could still teach them who they were. There were also moments when women's defiance surfaced more clearly. Refusing sexual access when possible, hiding pregnancies until they could not be hidden, slowing work while appearing busy, preserving food for a child, speaking sharply when danger pressed too close, escaping temporarily into illness or into the tiny private spaces of prayer and thought. The plantation would not have labelled these acts political. Of course, it labelled almost everything women did as service or disobedience. But from another angle, these acts form a map of selfhood under siege. Even beauty could become a quiet form of insistence, a neatly wrapped headcloth, a dress altered carefully to fit better. Clean children on a Sunday, hands oiled against cracking, a song sung low while stirring a pot. None of this erased domination, but it did say something. It said that life would not be reduced entirely to utility. It said that the eye, the hand, and the spirit still wanted shape and grace. In a world where enslavers claimed total authority, beauty could be a small rebellion precisely because it exceeded usefulness. By late evening, after children settle and the cabin quiets, a woman may finally sit with the day inside her bones. The fire is low. The smell of ash and damp wood settles around her. Her feet throb. Her shoulders tighten when she stops moving. Maybe she mends one more seam in poor light. Maybe she says a prayer. Maybe she simply closes her eyes for a moment and listens to insects outside, to breathing inside, to the faint rustle of cane in the dark. Even rest is crowded with responsibility. Someone may wake. Someone may need her. Dawn will come soon enough. That is why the lives of black women in the sugar parishes cannot be understood through labour statistics alone. Numbers miss the double burden. Really, the many burdens, fieldwork, sexual danger, childbearing, child rearing, domestic labour, emotional care, community memory, moral leadership. The plantation profited from all of it while acknowledging almost none of it honestly. If sugar wealth rested on broken bodies generally, it rested in a particularly intimate way on the bodies and labour of black women, who were expected to sustain life while the system consumed it. And still they did sustain life. That may be the most remarkable fact. Not that they endured only, but that they kept others alive with them. Beyond the cane rows and cabin yards, the sugar parishes form a wider world of roads, wharves, churches, courthouses, stores, and counting rooms, all tied together by profit and polished manners. If you only looked at the surface, you might think this was a place of order and respectable ambition. Carriages roll past oak-lined drives. Steamboats arrive with noise and elegance. Men in clean coats discuss prices, weather, drainage, and the prospects for a good season. Women in fine fabric step carefully across gallery floors. Bells ring on Sundays. Papers are signed, sermons are preached, hands are shaken. Everything looks civilized. That is the point. The system depends on appearing civilized while hiding what civilization is built from. Sugar wealth does not remain inside one plantation fence. It moves through merchants who extend credit, brokers who arrange shipments, lawyers who settle estates, doctors who tend valuable bodies, clergy who bless the social order, and public officials who defend the laws that keep it running. The plantation master may stand at the centre of his own estate, but the estate is held up by a whole parish society that knows very well where the money comes from. Everyone eats a little sweetness from the same bowl. Stores in the parish play their role neatly. They sell cloth, tools, lamp oil, shoes, nails, medicine, and luxury goods to planter families eager to display status. The shelves smell of wood, tobacco, coffee, leather, and dust. Barrels stand open. Fabric bolts rest in careful stacks. A merchant greets a planter warmly, perhaps asks after the crop, perhaps complains about transportation rates or the weather. Their conversation sounds ordinary because to them it is ordinary. The suffering that funds the transaction remains politely off-stage but never absent. A ledger can hide many cries. The courthouse belongs to the same moral landscape. Here debts are recognised, contracts enforced, estates divided, wills probated, and human property listed with a numb formality that still has the power to chill. A plantation can be mortgaged. A parcel of land can be disputed. Enslaved people can be counted among assets with livestock, tools, and buildings. The language is dry enough to seem harmless at first glance. Then you realise the dryness is part of the violence. A person disappears into inventory because the law has agreed to treat flesh like furniture with a pulse. Law gives slavery a backbone. Politeness gives it a face. Church gives it a blessing. The local churches, whether Catholic in older Louisiana traditions or Protestant in expanding Anglo-American culture, often stand as places of ritual respectability. The buildings may be modest or grand, but the social function is familiar. White families arrive dressed for public virtue. Voices lower, hats come off, hands fold. The language of sin, duty, providence, and moral order fills the air. You can almost smell the clean cloth, candle wax, wood polish, and humid Sunday perfume. The performance is careful, and that is what makes it unsettling. A man may pray sincerely in the morning and order a whipping in the afternoon. A woman may speak tenderly of Christian motherhood while owning another mother's child. The contradiction is not hidden because it does not need to be hidden. Parish society has arranged its values so that racial domination fits comfortably inside public piety. Ministers and priests did not all speak with one voice. Of course. Some may have shown concern for cruelty or urged better treatment, but concern for treatment is not the same as opposition to ownership. Very often religion worked not to dismantle slavery, but to smooth it, excuse it, or make it feel divinely arranged. Historians still argue over how much influence churches had in shaping daily discipline on plantations, and whether enslaved people used formal worship more for surveillance, selective accommodation, or genuine spiritual community under constraint. The answer likely shifted with parish, denomination, priest, preacher, and plantation. What remains unmistakable is that public religion often helped white society feel moral while living inside organised brutality. The marketplace reveals this hypocrisy in another way. Sugar from the parish moves outward toward New Orleans. Northern consumers and international trade. Goods move inward. Credit circulates. Newspapers report prices. Planters talk about markets with the same nervous attention a modern people reserve for interest rates or election returns. A bad season can ruin a man. A good one can elevate him. Yet even the anxious planter remains anxious from above, never from below. His worry concerns margin, prestige, debt, and competition. The enslaved worry about bodies, children, punishment, sale, and whether they can remain upright through the next day. These are not the same kind of worries. Parish society like to blur them, as though everyone were enduring together. A little hard weather for all, perhaps. How convenient. Planter households cultivated refinement as part of their claim to authority. Parlours were decorated, silver was displayed, books sat on shelves. Music might drift from a piano in the evening. Dinner could be served in courses under candlelight, with talk of politics, soil chemistry, river conditions, or the latest gossip from New Orleans. Guests were entertained, hospitality mattered. A household's elegance served as proof, at least in the planter imagination, that wealth had made them guardians of civilization. But the elegance was staffed, cooked, cleaned, carried, and overheard. Black domestics working in or near the big house occupied a complicated and often dangerous position. They could see planter life up close, hear private conversations, and move through rooms full of porcelain, silver, and social performance. That proximity sometimes led whites to imagine household slavery was easier or more privileged than field labour, easier compared with the cane rows, perhaps in certain physical respects, but never safe, never free, and often saturated with personal scrutiny. A domestic worker could be watched for tone, posture, speed, expression, and loyalty all at once. Mistakes became moral failings, knowledge became risk. One quirky detail from plantation culture is how obsessed elite white households could be with etiquette, while relying on a labour system that violated every humane standard. Proper fork placement, correct modes of address, appropriate calling hours, fine distinctions in morning dress. All of it mattered enormously to people who lived by a structure of ownership and coercion. It is difficult not to hear a note of absurdity in that. A man could worry over whether a visiting neighbour had been received with sufficient grace while he himself was maintaining a regime of forced labour by the river. Respectability can be a very expensive costume. Someone else pays for the fabric. The roads between plantations carry more than wagons and gossip. They carry surveillance. White men visit one another, discuss runaways, exchange news about discipline, and form a network of mutual reinforcement. Patrols and local authorities help secure the racial order. A planter is not merely an individual tyrant on isolated land. He is part of a class defending a shared system. That class solidarity matters because it makes resistance harder. To flee one plantation often means entering a wider landscape prepared to identify, question, and return you. The river itself is part of this larger world. Steamboats bring visitors, goods, letters, and news. They whistle, hiss, and churn against the docks with a noisy confidence that seems almost theatrical. The smell of coal smoke or wood smoke rolls across the levee. Deckhands call out. Cargo is shifted. Passengers descend in travel clothes creased from the journey. The river connects the parish to commerce, politics, and fashion beyond the local horizon. It also reminds everyone that sugar is not produced for local use alone. The entire parish is tied to a broader market that reaches far beyond the cane fields, and markets reward distance. The farther the consumer is from the field, the easier sweetness feels innocent. A spoonful in a northern teacup does not smell like sweat, smoke, and fear. Yet all those things are in it. The parish doctor occupies another uneasy position. He may be summoned to treat fevers, injuries, childbirth complications, or outbreaks of disease. His presence can carry an air of science and concern, with bottles, instruments, and technical words lending a sense of order. But medicine under slavery remains entangled with ownership. A doctor might genuinely seek recovery while still thinking of the patient as someone else's property. He might recommend rest because an investment should not be wasted. He might record symptoms with care while missing the most obvious diagnosis of all, that the entire labour system is making people sick. Lawyers and judges offer no cleaner picture. When disputes arise over estates, insurance, debt, or crime, the legal world steps in not as a neutral guardian of justice, but as a mechanism for maintaining social hierarchy. Black testimony may be discounted or barred. White violence can be softened by custom. Property claims outrank personhood because personhood itself has been racially rationed. In such a world, the courthouse clock, the polished desk, and the clerk's neat hand do not represent fairness. They represent procedure in the service of domination. Still, the wider parish world is not invisible to the enslaved. People working as teamsters, boat hands, household servants, artisans, or hired-out labourers can gather scraps of information. News travels in fragments. Who is in debt? Which planter is sick? Which family quarrels behind closed doors? Which road is watched more heavily? Whether a patrol has increased? Whether rumours of politics from Washington or New Orleans might someday alter the terms of life. Information is precious because it opens the imagination, even when it cannot immediately change reality. Women in domestic service often became especially important carriers of news, moving in and out of kitchens, galleries, sick rooms, and yards. They overheard conversations whites assumed were safely private. Men working with wagons, stables, levees, or mechanical repairs gathered other kinds of knowledge. Children too could hear more than adults expected, especially when ignored in rooms where whites felt secure. Parish society may have imagined itself opaque from above. From below, it leaked constantly. Scholars still debate how politically aware enslaved people, in particular Louisiana parishes, could be about national events during the 1850s, including sectional tensions, local elections, and legal controversies. Levels of access surely varied, but access did not have to be complete to matter. Even partial knowledge could shift mood, raise hope, deepen dread, or alter how people interpreted the behaviour of those who ruled them. A nervous planter class often reveals more than it intends. The white women of planter society also played a role in maintaining the system, though their authority differed from that of men. They managed households, supervised domestic labour, enforced standards of cleanliness and obedience, monitored food, clothing, and childcare, and helped pass on the racial values of the class. Some later memoirs would paint them as delicate bystanders, softened by refinement and suffering under rough frontier conditions. That picture is incomplete at best. A mistress could be a direct agent of discipline, humiliation, and emotional control. Grace and cruelty shared many verandas. By late afternoon in the parish, the public world begins to glow with a certain golden calm. Carriages return home, merchants close shutters, churchyards empty. The levee quiets after the day's arrivals, the sky softens over the river, and the live oaks cast long shadows across roads that look almost serene. It is a beautiful hour. This region has many beautiful hours. That beauty forms part of its deception, perhaps even part of its success. It helps respectable people feel that the world they have made is stable, natural, and well-ordered. But beneath the glow lies calculation. Always calculation. Who owes what? Who owns whom? Who commands? Who obeys? Who pretends not to notice? In the Louisiana sugar parishes, slavery survives not only because one planter can threaten one field hand, but because an entire social order collaborates in keeping coercion normal. The merchant extends credit. The minister blesses hierarchy. The judge protects property. The neighbour returns a runaway. The newspaper lists prices. The doctor restores labour. The dinner guest admires the house. The system is communal in its benefits and selective in its conscience. That is why the wider parish world matters so much. It reveals that plantation violence is not an isolated moral failure hidden out in the cane. It is integrated into roads, institutions, habits, and respectable speech. It sits in pews. It signs contracts. It hosts supper. It discusses the weather. It complains about tariffs. It praises order while living off disorder imposed on others. The grand lie of the sugar parishes is not merely that slavery is profitable, it is that profit, once dressed well enough, can pass for virtue. And many were eager to believe exactly that. In the sugar parishes, the desire to escape lives everywhere, even when escape itself feels almost impossible. It lives in a glance toward the road, in the silence after a threat, in the way a person listens when distant dogs begin barking at night. It lives in a rumour, in memory, in prayer, and in the small inward sentence a human being repeats when the world insists on calling bondage normal. I should not be here. That thought alone could be dangerous. And yet it persisted. Of course it persisted. No system of slavery, however organised, ever rested on true consent. It rested on force, surveillance, and the constant labour of crushing refusal before refusal could grow teeth. That is why the sugar parishes were so watchful. The wealth was too large, the labour too demanding, and the fear too deep for planters to assume obedience would simply hold. They knew people wanted out. The entire regime was built around that knowledge. Running away from a sugar plantation in Louisiana carried terrifying risks. The landscape itself could betray you. Cane fields were thick but not endlessly protective. Bayous, swamps, and wetlands offered concealment, yet they also brought mud, insects, snakes, hunger, fever, and disorientation. Roads were watched. Neighbouring plantations formed a net of white authority. Patrols, dogs, ferries, and levies all narrowed a person's options. A stranger moving through the parish without explanation could draw attention quickly. Waterways that looked like escape routes could become traps after dark. Still, people ran. Some fled briefly to avoid punishment or recover a little control over their bodies. Some tried to visit family on nearby plantations. Some disappeared for days into woods or swamps and then returned, whether by choice, exhaustion, or capture. Others aimed for longer escape, hoping to reach New Orleans, pass as hired labour, board a vessel, or somehow move northward through a world that had been organised to stop them. Each plan demanded nerve, luck, knowledge, and often help from others. Help mattered. No one outruns a system alone for long. A person planning to flee needed information more than heroics. Which roads were patrolled most heavily? Which ferryman might ask fewer questions? Which neighbouring plantation had kin or trusted friends? Where dogs were kept? Whether a stormy night might cover sound? Whether a boat lay unsecured at the levee? Whether an overseer drank too much on Saturdays? Whether a free black person in town might risk passing along news or supplies? Under slavery, knowledge could be as valuable as bread. New Orleans sometimes hovered in the imagination as both danger and possibility. It was a slave market and a seat of power, but also a large city with mixed populations, shipping traffic, and crowded spaces where a person might briefly disappear. Free black communities existed there, as did docks, alleys, workshops, and boarding houses full of movement. That did not make the city safe. Far from it. But in a landscape of plantations, a city could look like confusion, and confusion could look like opportunity. Then again, confusion can mislead. A crowded street is not freedom. It is only a place with more corners. Some runaways left behind almost no trace beyond a brief note in a planter journal or an advertisement in a newspaper. Absconded. Likely headed toward. Has marks on. Speaks in such a manner. The ads are chilling because they reduce desperate human acts to property notices, yet they also accidentally preserve resistance. Every runaway ad is evidence that someone refused. Someone made the calculation that whatever waited on the road, it was worth risking against the certainty of staying. The descriptions in such notices could be unnervingly detailed. A scar on the cheek, a limp, a talent for carpentry, a habit of speaking softly, a suspicion that the fugitive might try to pass for free. Enslavers watched closely because they had to. They wanted recovery, but they also wanted to reassure themselves that the act of running was exceptional rather than ordinary. The truth was likely less comforting. Escape lived in many minds, even if only a few could attempt it at any given moment. Women ran too, though the historical record often frames their flight less dramatically than men's. A woman might escape with a child, toward a spouse, away from sexual threat, or simply away from unbearable labour. She might hide nearby rather than attempt a long journey. She might rely on kin networks, market spaces, or domestic contacts rather than open roads. Her calculations could be even more agonising because children changed every decision. A mother fleeing alone risked leaving them behind. A mother fleeing with them risked slowing the journey and exposing them to tremendous danger. That is not a choice. It is a wound disguised as a choice. Children also resisted in ways adults sometimes overlooked. They learned paths. They carried messages. They watched white routines. Older children might slip off to nearby kin, hide in outbuildings, or participate in small deceptions that shielded adults from punishment. Even a child's silence could matter. The plantation depended on information, and refusing to give it, or pretending not to know it, could form part of a larger culture of survival. Resistance did not always wear adult clothes. The fear of rebellion haunted planter society even when no rebellion had yet formed. Louisiana had good reason to remember this fear. The memory of the 1811 German coast uprising lingered powerfully in the region, when enslaved men in southeastern Louisiana mounted one of the largest slave revolts in United States history before it was violently suppressed. By the 1850s, that memory had become part warning, part obsession, part justification for continued harsh control. White people invoked past revolt not as a lesson against slavery, naturally, but as a reason for more patrols, more suspicion, more discipline. Memory can travel strangely. For the enslaved, revolt could become proof that resistance was imaginable. For the enslavers, the same memory became proof that terror must remain active. That double meaning shaped parish life. Open rebellion in the sugar parishes of the 1850s does not appear to have erupted on the scale white planters feared, but fear itself altered behaviour. Planters worried about gatherings, secret meetings, unfamiliar movement at night, tools in the wrong hands, drums, songs, preachers, and rumours from the wider world. Sometimes they feared these things with absurd intensity. A group of men talking quietly could become, in the white imagination, the beginning of insurrection. A missing skiff could mean conspiracy. Too much confidence in an enslaved driver could look suspicious. The anxious mind of the slaveholder was always half haunted by the truth it tried to deny, that the people it owned had reasons to hate the arrangement. Historians still argue over how often organised plots truly developed in the later antebellum sugar parishes, and how much planter fear inflated fragments of gossip into imagined conspiracies. That uncertainty is not surprising. Real plots would be hidden. False alarms would be exaggerated. White records often reveal more about planter anxiety than about enslaved intentions. Yet the uncertainty itself is meaningful. It tells you that the possibility of rebellion never left the room. There were other forms of resistance too, less dramatic but often more common. Slow work, feigned illness, tool breaking, theft of food, concealed literacy, secret travel to family, hidden religious meetings, guarded humour aimed at the powerful, refusal to reveal another person's whereabouts. These acts did not overthrow the plantation, but they reminded everyone inside it that domination was never complete. An enslaved person could be forced to labour, but not easily forced to cooperate with full sincerity. That last part mattered enormously. Planters wanted labour. They also wanted submission to feel natural. Resistance denied them the comfort of that illusion. One odd and revealing detail in plantation records is how often owners complained about laziness, when the behaviour described sounds suspiciously like exhaustion, grief, or quiet sabotage. A worker stops often, a tool goes missing, a task takes too long, a hand seems careless with equipment. White observers loved the word indolence because it turned oppression into a flaw of character in the oppressed. It saved them from acknowledging the more obvious explanation that people worked under compulsion, and therefore resisted in the ways they could. Language, once again, served power very neatly. Runaways who were captured faced grim consequences. Punishment could be severe, and the display of punishment could be meant as a lesson to others. Sale farther away was another threat, especially if an enslaver decided the person was too troublesome to keep. Iron collars, chains, whipping, confinement, and close surveillance all entered the repertoire of discipline. Yet even knowing this, people still ran. That fact is worth pausing over. It tells you something essential about the level of misery involved. When the punishment for leaving is terrible and a person leaves anyway, staying has already become a kind of slow ruin. Some people sought not full escape, but hidden breathing room. They made small truces with geography. A thicket near the back of a field where one could pause unseen. A neighbour's cabin where a whispered conversation could happen after dark. A bit of marsh where a man avoided the worst of an overseer's temper for a few hours. These spaces were temporary and fragile, but they mattered. Human beings deprived of formal freedom often create unofficial versions of it, measured in minutes, not legal status. Black mariners, hired labourers, and free people of colour sometimes formed part of the wider web through which information or aid might pass, though this varied enormously and carried real danger for everyone involved. Louisiana's racial order was complex by Southern standards, especially around New Orleans, where free black communities had a visible presence. But complexity did not equal safety. Free status could be precarious, heavily policed, and sharply limited by law and custom. Still, any contact across plantation boundaries had the potential to open channels of news, sympathy, and occasional help. Scholars continue to debate how connected enslaved people in the sugar parishes were to broader anti-slavery currents by the 1850s. Direct ties to organised abolitionist networks were likely limited in many rural areas. Yet ideas do not need formal membership cards to travel. News of politics, court cases, sectional conflict, and northern criticism of slavery could move through newspapers overheard, conversations stolen, sailors encountered, or travellers watched. Hope could spread in fragments. So could fear, and fear did spread. White fear, black fear, different kinds, unequal in power, but thick in the same air. The approach of the late 1850s intensified that mood. National tensions over slavery deepened. White Southerners became more defensive, more suspicious, and in many places more strident in claiming slavery as a positive good rather than a necessary evil. That ideological hardening would not have made daily life gentler in the sugar parishes. Quite the opposite. When a ruling class feels threatened, it rarely responds by loosening its grip on the people beneath it. It sharpens control and calls that prudence. At night in the quarters, whispers about escape or danger would have carried a special charge. The cabin is dim. The fire has settled to red coals. Outside, insects pulse in the dark and somewhere far off water shifts against the bank. A name is spoken softly. A road is mentioned. Someone has heard something. Someone knows a patrol route. Someone says not now. Someone says soon. Someone says nothing. But the set of the jaw tells enough. These are fragile moments, suspended between longing and risk. Not every plan becomes action. Not every action becomes memory. Not every memory becomes record. But the desire is there, always there. That is what the sugar parishes could never finally erase. They could coerce labour, monitor movement, punish bodies, and surround the landscape with law and whiteness and dogs and debt and fear. They could do all of that. What they could not do was make bondage feel rightful to the people inside it. The road, the river, the swamp, the city, the rumour of a different future, all remained charged with possibility, however faint. Resistance did not need to succeed fully to matter. It mattered because it kept alive the truth that enslavement was an outrage, not a natural order. So when you listen closely to the history of the Louisiana sugar parishes, you hear more than mills, whips, and wagon wheels. You hear absence, a person not in the cabin at dawn, a missing tool, a delayed task, a whisper cut short when footsteps approach, a planter's complaint in a ledger, a newspaper ad seeking a runaway, a child who knows more than he says. These are the sounds of people refusing in every register available to them. Some refusals were small enough to fit inside a glance. Some were large enough to risk death. All of them remind you that beneath the plantation's performance of order, there ran a constant human current of dissent. By the 1850s, people did not need a poet to tell them what Louisiana sugar country could feel like. The truth was already moving from mouth to mouth in warning, rumour, testimony, and dread. The sugar parishes had a name for wealth, but among the enslaved they also had a reputation for something closer to slow destruction. You can understand why when you stand still and take in the full arrangement, the cane, the mill, the smoke, the ledgers, the cabins, the river carrying profit away, the people left behind to produce more, everything fits together too well. That is what makes it so chilling. This is not accidental cruelty scattered here and there across a rough landscape. It is organised cruelty, refined until it can power an industry. The heat is natural. The mud is natural, the subtropical fevers are natural, but the way all those conditions are harnessed to forced labour and the way human beings are driven through them for gain, that is deliberate. A field becomes a machine, a mill becomes a mouth, a parish becomes an appetite, and appetites do not pity. That may be the clearest thing of all. When people later called the sugar parishes a death sentence, they did not always mean that every plantation killed quickly or spectacularly. The phrase carries something more dreadful than a single blow. It suggests a place where life is steadily narrowed, where each season extracts another portion of strength, where danger surrounds labour from so many directions that the body has little chance to recover fully. A person might survive for years and still feel sentenced. A woman might raise children there and still feel every dawn as a demand she did not choose. A man might learn the soil and machinery with extraordinary skill and still know the system regarded that skill only as usable property. The sentence was in the totality: work without consent, movement without freedom, family without security, faith without protection, sleep without rest, food without fullness, life without ownership of one's own body. That accumulation is harder to dramatize than a single violent scene, but it may be more revealing. A human being does not only break from one event, a human being can also be worn down by repetition, morning after morning in the fields, night after night in the sugar house, season after season of fear that a child may be sold, a punishment may fall, a fever may take hold, or a moment of weakness may become an excuse for cruelty. The plantation excels at repetition. It builds power by making suffering ordinary. The word ordinary can sound too soft, yet ordinary suffering is often the deepest kind. It enters the bones. In the sugar parishes, the environment itself seems drafted into the system. Humidity keeps clothes damp against the skin. Mosquitoes trouble sleep and spread illness. Mud pulls at feet and cartwheels alike. Cold snaps threaten the crop and therefore intensify labour. The river that gives the region its wealth also ties it to markets that reward relentless production. Nature is not the author of slavery, but slavery uses nature with grim efficiency. The land becomes another overseer. Planters, of course, preferred other language. They spoke of enterprise, discipline, improvement, management, and civilization. They admired drainage systems, machinery, crop yields, and architectural display. Some no doubt convinced themselves that they were stern but necessary men, guardians of productivity in a difficult environment. There is an almost comic vanity in that self-image, if it were not so damaging. A man standing on a gallery, pleased with his boilers and his imported silver, calling himself a benefactor while whole families labour under compulsion nearby. It takes a certain style of moral imagination to look at bondage and see excellence. The planter class had cultivated that imagination very carefully. Historians still debate some particulars. Which plantations were deadliest? How mortality compared exactly with other slave labour regimes? How much local variation existed in food, punishment, housing, or medical attention? These questions matter, and the evidence does not always line up neatly, but the broad shape remains unmistakable. Louisiana sugar demanded punishing labour, dangerous processing, and a social order built to extract as much value as possible from enslaved people with as little regard for their autonomy as the law allowed. The argument is rarely about whether it was brutal. It is about how brutal, in what ways, and with what measurable consequences. For the people living there, measurement probably mattered less than feeling. How heavy is the hoe today? How sharp is the cane on your forearm? How long since you slept properly? How much does your child eat? How bad is the cough? How far to the road? How loudly did the overseer speak your name? That is the scale at which bondage is experienced. Not in abstract percentages, but in sensations. The smell of smoke caught in hair after night work. The ache in the lower back that greets you before the sun does. The sweetness of molasses becoming cloying because it is tied to exhaustion. The roughness of cheap cloth against skin made tender by labour. The sound of the mill continuing after dark like a threat that does not sleep. Sugar wealth is sensory at the top of society too, certainly. Fine cakes, coffee sweetened, crystal bowls on polished tables, but its deepest sensory history lives below, in heat, soot, blood, mud, and the sticky residue of work. One strange and revealing feature of the whole system is how often white observers admired its visual order. They saw neat rows of cane, well-kept yards, impressive houses, tidy books, and busy mills, then mistook arrangement for virtue. Human beings are vulnerable to that mistake. A thing that runs smoothly can appear justified. The sugar parish depended on that illusion. If the wagons roll, the boilers thicken, the levee bustles, and the planter hosts dinner elegantly enough, then perhaps the suffering underneath can be filed away as regrettable necessity. That is how respectable evil survives. It rarely presents itself as chaos. It presents itself as order with good posture. But beneath the posture is fragility. The system knows it. That is why it fears resistance to rumours, illness, debt, weather, bad markets, and its own labour force all at once. A world that must use so much force to hold itself together is not strong in the moral sense. It is merely armed. The sugar regime appears grand because it is profitable. It appears secure because law and violence support it, yet it is haunted. Haunted by runaway notices, by whispers in the quarters, by memories of revolt, by sleepless planters wondering whether the crop will fail, whether workers will endure, whether the debt will come due, whether one spark will catch in more ways than one. The grandeur of the sugar parish always has a trembling edge. For black Americans living under this regime, that trembling edge could not simply be admired from afar, it had to be navigated daily. One had to raise children there, love there, bury there, joke there, pray there, and keep some inward sense of self there. That might be the most astonishing part of the history. Not only that the system was cruel, but that human life continued inside it with intelligence and feeling intact. People still made kin. They still mourned honestly. They still tended the sick, hid food, remembered names, sang, warned one another, and imagined escape or change. The plantation wanted labouring bodies. It kept encountering full people instead. And full people suffer more deeply because they understand what is being taken. That is why the phrase death sentence reaches beyond mortality alone. It speaks to a place where time itself is seized. The years that might have belonged to your own household, your own earnings, your own movement, your own choices, are consumed by someone else's schedule. The sentence is not just the risk of dying early. Though that risk is real, it is the theft of living on one's own terms. To be sentenced is to have your future announced by another. The sugar parish did that every morning. Work here, eat this, sleep there, obey him. Fear that, do not leave, do not refuse, do not imagine too much, yet imagination remained. It survived in prayer, in memory, in plans to run, in a mother's insistence on raising a child to know love, in a father's careful teaching of skill or caution, in elders preserving names and stories, in the sarcasm that punctured white pretension, in the beauty people made out of rags, gardens, recipes, songs, and touch. If the sugar regime was a sentence, then black life in the parish was also an ongoing refusal to let the sentence define everything. The refusal did not erase pain, it prevented pain from being the whole story. That matters because history can sometimes flatten the enslaved into symbols of suffering alone, and suffering alone is too narrow. The people in the cane were frightened, exhausted, punished, and exploited. Yes. They were also observant, skilled, funny, strategic, loving, suspicious, devout, angry, protective, and tired in very specific ways. A person hauling cane to the mill might also be a father listening for a child's cough. A woman nursing an infant after fieldwork might also be a keeper of remedies, songs, and family memory. A teenager under surveillance might also be memorizing the road, the river bend, the names of men to avoid, and the exact tone that could keep punishment from escalating. Full humanity persisted, which is precisely why slavery had to work so hard against it. By evening in the sugar parish, the beauty returns again, infuriatingly calm. Light turns honey-coloured on the river. Trees darken at the edges. The air softens just enough to remind the skin what relief might feel like. Birds settle. Smoke rises straight for a moment before drifting. The landscape can look almost holy, but if you listen beneath the frogs and insects, beneath the distant creak of wheels and the low murmur from cabins, you hear the deeper truth. This peace has been manufactured through coercion. This beauty is sharing space with bondage. This stillness is not innocence. It is the pause inside a system that will begin again at dawn, and dawn always comes. That is the sorrow in it, also the courage, because dawn comes for the people in the quarters too, and somehow they keep meeting it. They rise with sore bodies and unfinished grief. They step into fields and mills and kitchens and yards. They carry memory into labour. They carry labour back into the cabins. They carry one another when they can, in a place built to reduce human beings to sugar-making force. They continue to act like human beings anyway. That is not a sentimental ending. It is a hard one. Their humanity did not save them from suffering. It made the suffering visible, and it made survival meaningful. So when you ask what it was like for Black Americans in the 1850s sugar parishes, the answer is not only that it was brutal, though it certainly was. It is that the brutality was systematic, intimate, profitable, and dressed in respectable clothing. It was a world where labour could maim, sale could shatter, piety could lie, and beauty could not be trusted to mean safety. It was a place where every sweetness had a bitterness underneath it, a place where law, landscape, and white ambition met to create one of the harshest corners of American slavery, a death sentence. Then, not always in the quick sense, but in the slow, daily one, a sentence spoken in cane leaves and boiler smoke, a sentence counted in lost sleep, lost kin, lost strength, lost years, and yet never fully accepted by the people forced to live inside it. Now the night grows deeper over the river and the fields begin to blur into shadow. The sharp edges soften, the smoke thins, the sounds of labour fade until only the gentlest traces remain. A distant insect song, a breath of wind through cane, a quiet human murmur settling into rest. You let the heaviness of the history loosen its grip a little. The roads no longer need to be watched. The mill is far away now. The ledgers close, the lamps dim. What stays with you is not only the cruelty, but the endurance of people who kept a private warmth alive in cold conditions of power. You can feel the air cooling at last, the earth giving back the day's heat, the darkness turning softer and wider. The river moves on without hurry, the cabins grow still. Somewhere in that immense Louisiana night, tired bodies finally find a little stillness, and the fields, for a few brief hours, stop asking for more. Let the sounds drift farther away now. Let the smoke dissolve into the dark. Let the cane become only a whisper in the wind, and let the night hold everything gently, quietly, until even this hard history settles into silence.